Said this is the newest module standard that MVNS has been doing. We've been doing it since 18. We've had some really successful layouts. I see a lot of big things for this group in the near future. So like we said, we're going to go through this, how to build a module. First, we need to talk about the standard, what it is and what it's not. Sizes and types, it's all based on Kato Unitrak. We've got singles, and notice the dimensions here, it's metric, because Kato Unitrak is metric. People call them 1-footers and 2-footers, but if you try to build with those dimensions, you will have bad modules. So we want to focus on those details. So singles, doubles, triples, quads. Standard corners are 315 millimeter and 282 radii. Special modules, junctions, inside corners, end caps, large radius corners, non-standard modules. Some examples. This is a single, the Lego version. How many different times have we seen this? Half a dozen. Everyone's different. These are some singles from the Bloomington Normal crew that set up with us in Springfield. A double, a triple, a quad, a standard corner. That's those two radius we're talking about. A junction module where we can get diverging paths. An inside corner. Large radius corners, an end cap. And then the non-standard. And this one's really hard to see. If you guys saw this at Springfield, it's a triple down this side and it's a quad down that side. And it's continuous across the table. So this is one big module. If we're going to build these things, we need to have a serious conversation. This one's not great. It works, but if you want to build something like that, talk to us, and we'll help guide you through it.
Yeah, this one causes Allie to do some work on the planning side of the
yes.
layout.
So rules. What are our rules? What is the standard? We have to be Kato Unitrak on the ends of the modules. That's it. You can put whatever track you want in the middle, as long as it's done well and you don't have derailment issues or other operating issues. You can use whatever track you want. Okay? I will say using Kato Unitrak makes life easy, so most everybody just goes with Kato Unitrak, but you can do whatever you want. Straight modules should be multiples of 310 millimeters units of track for reasons of compatibility. When we get to a layout and we start putting single, single, double, triple, single, whatever, I can put matching number of units on the other side and it should line up. Okay? So having this multiple of 310 allows us a lot of flexibility when it comes to designing a layout. You just basically dropping blocks in, and this block's worth 4 and this block's worth 2, and you put 6 on the other side, and it's all good. We can do odd lengths though. If those don't really work for you for some reason, as long as you build them in a pair, maybe it's, you build one that's 400 or 700 millimeters down the side. As long as you build another one the same length, we can put those opposite each other on a loop and it works. You just have to build 2. Or you build 2 that total that multiple of 310. If I add these 2 guys up, they come up to be 620, it's a double. Okay, for some scenic reason you want it split, okay, together they equal a double. The module bases, it's got to be 2 millimeters shorter than the track. So when we talk about a single, it's 310 millimeters. Our base, this guy's 308, so that the track can overhang. Okay. Maximum depth is 14 inches. I say that, but it's not a hard, fast rule. If you build a depth of 14 inches, you can put another module opposite it and use standard corners to connect them, and you don't run into an interference issue. If you build one that's 18 inches deep, well, build one that's narrower to set opposite it, so you're not taking up that other space. Or if you're designing your modules to use with large radius corners, then you have more freedom. Okay?
As far as the deeper modules too, just the offset can go to the front without causing too many issues. The way we set our layouts up is normally 2 tables wide or better. There's a little bit more real estate to the front. The back needs to stay more rigid. So again, no real prohibition there. Just think expanding to the front rather than deeper if you can, depending on what your scene is.
I will say 14 inches it's a good number. It's easy to transport. You get much bigger, then you start running out of space in our cars.
Yes, Rich?
14 or 14 3/8?
I say 14 because I'm a sloppy carpenter.
Okay.
That gives me 3/8 of slop in the back. Or if you want to put a skyboard up, that leaves me room to put a skyboard. So it's really, I mean, technically 14 3/8 is the absolute max to maintain those radiuses, but I don't like to deal right up to those limits personally.
Yeah, 14. That's what we need, because I need that 6/8, on the other side, so that we have that wiggle room.
Yeah.
So,
The ballast of the front track should be 1.5 inches from the front module at the edge. Allie will talk about this later and how we control that. And the track spacing must be 33 millimeters at the edge of the modules. So again, if I look at this as my base unit, I need my track about here on the ends. It can be anywhere you want here,
The space you're talking center to center?
center to center.
And we, again, recommend these little Kato double track cheater pieces to use on the ends to help ensure the 1 millimeter gap and your track center to center spacing
Yeah,
as
and
well.
Allie will talk in more detail about how do we achieve these things as we get further in. The wiring. Okay, does every module need power? No, but every layout needs power. So some modules have to have power. Okay, as we talk about power, the T Trak standard is using Kato connectors. Tamiya plugs is another way they're known as. Some clubs are pushing Anderson power pole to stay consistent with their end track, but the standard is Kato. Okay, you go to a big layout, the planner's expecting Kato plugs. Bob, for instance, has his arch module. He's got Anderson power pole in the back, but he's got adapters that he can plug that in and give us Kato so that we can make his connections. The standard Kato power connectors have a blue and white wire. This is very important to understand. The next line, modules are wired from front to back, blue, white, white, blue. As you read things in T Trak, T Trak Wikidot, T Trak Facebook groups, people will abbreviate this BWWB, blue, white, white, blue, whatever it is. There's a lot of reasons for this. A lot of discussion about it, often debated, but it's non-negotiable. It needs to be blue, white, white, blue to be correct to the standard. This is my favorite way to do power. You buy these suckers, you just pop off the connectors at the middle of your track, and I've got my required plug. And oh look, there's the blue and white wires. What does it look like in installation? It looks like this. Front of the module, blue, white, white, blue. Okay? Why blue, white, white, blue? Honestly, people think it's just dumb luck we ended up here, but as we walk through it, it's like it's really genius. The early days say I could run one transformer and I have trains going in different directions, right? Everything, blues got together, whites got together, so now my trains on DC would go different directions. When I assemble it with a balloon, I don't need to worry about isolating anything because my outer rails remain one loop. Blue on the outside stays blue on the outside.
What's a balloon?
This is kind of a pseudo balloon where you take the front line and you make a loop and you come back to the back line. So you could have a linear layout against a wall with a return so your trains have continuous operation. Normally we tend to do a racetrack style, but if we do a linear layout, we'll have balloons on the end to turn the trains around.
Oh, the loop brings it back to the same.
They call them balloons. Yeah. Why, and again, blue, white, white, blue, a power module can be flipped front to back with no issues. So if I take that module, and I got this picture in here, if you guys remember Springfield, this was the back line of the layout, this module, we turned around. We flipped it front to back for aesthetic reasons. If this were powered, I could plug that in. I don't have any issues. I don't have any continuity issues. It works. Okay? The only downside from this, crossovers. If I'm trying to do a crossover from front to back, I now have a polarity issue. Okay? How do we deal with that? We adjust that at the power supply. Our Frankenbox Junior box, the yellow line, we flipped the polarity on it. So it's actually, if you would take a voltmeter and test it, it's positive, negative across our layout, typically. So we can run a crossover. We fixed this in Springfield.
We did, yeah.
If you want more information, this has got a very extensive discussion of why blue, white, white, blue. And when we're all done, we'll share this presentation with you guys so you can get access to this stuff. But that's a good, interesting read one night. Questions? Why? Why do we want to build to the standard? Why don't we just do what we want to do? T Trak's an international standard. Clubs around the country, Canada, Mexico, France, Spain, UK, Australia, it just keeps building. These are just the countries I could find, right? And if you're on the T Trak Facebook group, the guys in France have amazing layouts. And if we ever get to France with our modules, we could go plug in with them and go play. Okay?
I just found out that there's a Ukrainian T-Trak group.
Yeah. Building to the standard allows multiple people, clubs, countries to run together on the same layout. An example of this was Springfield. Just a couple weeks ago, we met up with the Bloomington Normal guys. Right? We had a combined layout. We had 12 different people, 2 different clubs. All the pictures from that first slide where I went through all the different module types, that was all from Springfield. So we ran every possible combination of a module in Springfield. And every issue that we had with setup, if you guys that were there remember, setup was a little rocky. Every issue we found was because the module wasn't built to the standard, wasn't wired to the standard. So build it to the standard, and we don't have problems. It just plugs together, and it works.
The bulk of that was the blue-white.
Some of it was blue. There was a module from the Bloomington Club that was wired blue, white. So when everything got plugged together, it shorted out. I screwed up the wiring on the club yard. I had something reversed.
Can I get that document?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I own that one. Again, build it to the standard, we don't have problems. Construction methods, materials, commercially available modules, you can go buy these things. I think those might be examples. These,
It is.
so that looks like a CMR or Masterpiece.
Masterpiece one.
Okay, Masterpiece and CMR tend to build 1/4-inch Baltic birch plywood with laser cut, tab and notch construction, well done modules. I can't say anything bad about them. Price of $16 was the last price I found on their website. I don't know that I could build it for $16. Okay, trouble is, with everything happening in Ukraine, you can't buy Baltic birch plywood anymore. So Masterpiece is temporarily not selling. CMR, same thing, out of stock. Cotto Woodland Scenics. Woodland Scenics is using their subterranean construction tools, and they've got some T Trak kits that you can buy. Some people have done some nice work with those. And this guy, Stuart Dennison, he's an individual on the Facebook group. He's selling modules as well, and everybody says they're phenomenal.
And if you tune in to today's NRAIL discussion at 3 p.m., he's doing a presentation.
Okay.
I just got the email on that
Okay.
this morning.
But everything I've seen that people say Stuart's stuff is amazing. I don't know what his prices are like, but he does good stuff. So if you don't want to build your own, here's some options.
And what kills you on these? The shipping, right? One of the benefits of being in the club is that you can go in with other guys, make a larger order, and save on shipping. So when you see those prices, you're going to see the shipping, and it's going to blow you off your chair. Remember, go in with other guys and try to save yourself on shipping.
So if you're going to do them yourself, typically top materials 1/4-inch or 5mm sanded plywood. also known as underlayment. There's a Home Depot SKU number. It's $21.38 for 4x8 sheet. How many modules can you get out of a 4x8 sheet? 2, 3, 4, 3, 7, 21 singles can come out of a 4x8 sheet at max width. You can probably get it up to 28 if you don't go 14 inches. So you can get a lot of modules out of a single sheet of plywood. Sides, use the same material if you want. I prefer 1x3 pine. Two choices here, though. The premium kiln dried, which you go, oh, it's premium, it's the good stuff. It's not. The select is the good stuff. The select is what I use just because it's nice and straight, doesn't warp.
Also marketed as clear pine, I believe. In
Clear
most
pine's
cases.
another name.
Yeah.
But here's the Home Depot SKU numbers for those, prices from a month ago.
Warpage is pretty rare in that clear pine, so just check your boards whenever you pull them down from the rack or,
Right.
or go to the lumber yard.
So you go double the price. It's worth every penny. I've done both. The clear pine, the select kiln dried is the way to do it. It's, you cut it, it's straight, you're off and running. What makes the best module? It's personal preference. We've got examples here of 1/4 inch plywood, 1x3 plywood. Malcolm likes to build his out of 3/4 plywood for his frame with the 1/4 inch tops. It's what you have available. But we did a build, when was that? It was after our first show, we needed more modules. Jerry Pratt, Joe Rose and I got together at Joe's house and we built modules. We did 28 modules in 25 hours and we used this method. So we've got some that are 1/4 inch, they're holding up.
Yeah, here's what the 1/4 inch ones look like on the bottom side. The entire module is cut 1/4 inch plywood, 2 dimension. Allie has a really nice wood shop and was kind enough to build some modules for me early in the journey. And so again, with the in this case, the legs help provide some of the stability for the module. It was glued and air nailed together, and these hold up just fine. But the 1x method seems to be the emerging trend as far as what is going to make for a more robust frame going forward.
I think as we get into this, you'll understand why. I've got a table saw. I can't say that I'm really happy with how my table saw cuts. I don't know that I can get that accurate. So, like I said, I'm a sloppy carpenter, but I've got a good chop saw. So I'll take my chop saw and I'll accurately cut my front boards and my back board to the right length, right? So I got to make 2 important cuts. I'll cut my sides to whatever my depth is. Again, that's not a critical dimension, so if I'm off an 1/8 or a 1/16, as long as they're the same, I don't really care. I'll hack out my top with a circular saw and I'll just overcut it by 1 inch. I'll assemble my base, screws and glue. I get a nice square box, slap the top on it with an 1 inch overhang, and I'll use a router with a flush cutting bit, a guide bit on the bottom, and just zip it around my accurate frame. And I end up with an accurate top. And like I said, from a time standpoint, Jerry Pratt, Joe Rose and I did 28 of these, and like I said, 25 man hours. So we were, less than an hour a piece to build a module. But we assembly lined them, right? You were up first.
I haven't seen it declared, but is the standard then that the track is on that plywood, or is there no provision for dimensional difference?
A road bed?
The layer foam to be able to create terrain?
The standard is to build, most people build them with this depth, right? And then the track lays right on here. And this would be the standard. Now, that said, you could elevate up with scenery. Bob's got an example.
This one here, if you see, there's notches up here inside. This is a masterpiece modules kit. He's got 2 versions. He's got a flush top and he's got a 1 inch recessed deck. This has the 1 inch recessed deck. There's 1 inch foam in there. That allowed me to cut in drainage ditches, make other adjustments with the terrain. So there, you can do that. You can use foam to make a module.
As far as subterranean goes, can kind of do a inverted box. This one is going to have a river crossing scene in it eventually, so I wanted some depth between the bridge and the river. So the track height will be at the edge of this module frame across the top, and Kevin has a frame up here too that's built the same way. So the idea is I'll use a piece of plywood across there for the sub-road bed for the track, leave it open for the river scene, and then fill in around it. I like to use great stuff, foam, or this the Woodland Scenics riser works as well for a sub-road bed. But the great stuff keeps the weight down, and you can carve it pretty easily to match whatever terrain you're wanting to simulate there in this case.
So what's the vertical dimension then that makes?
What track height to table is 3,
3.5.
3.5?
Yeah, 3.5. So.
Yeah.
Come over here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, cool. You got to get in the neighborhood here. This, I already, I've had so many numbers in my head, I forgot. You need to get in this neighborhood here. Can you grab me a single, please? Just a standard single. You need to get to this neighborhood. If you're off by an 1/8 or 1/4, we can fix it with a leveling, okay? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Dana. Is that about right? Is that if you're off a little bit, we can handle it. This is one of the adjusting bolts.
We've dealt with warped tables too in the past.
Warp
It
tables,
shows.
right. We get a lot of throw with
What would
these.
you say, half inch, 3/4, or, I mean, what would that be desirable now?
Typically we'll want to, so if this is 2 3/4 inches thick, you know, the standard is it should be adjustable up to 4. So you need about 1 1/4 of adjustment.
Not here, Roy, you're saying 4?
We want the adjustments to be a max of 4 inches
Okay, that's your track,
to the top of the platform. So,
platform, not the track.
correct, right. So with an inch and a half, 1 3/4 bolt, you know, that gives us adjustability from, you know, almost 0. So we're, you know, 2 3/4 to 4. So we can move this up and down on the table. So if you're a sloppy carpenter like me and this is not 2 3/4, I don't really care, as long as it's
One
close.
further question is, does the Unitrack require ending up on plywood, or can it be on that foam that we're talking about?
It can be on foam. Fastening it down becomes a bit of a challenge. Actually getting it to stay can be a bit of a challenge, but with the right scenery materials,
I'm speaking of ignorance, I have no experience with this Unitrack stuff, so.
I include one of the power grab, Loctite power grab, panel pieces.
And you're satisfied with that then?
It's held up really well.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think how to frame it. As a cost-cutting measure, if you bought 1x4s and ripped them in half with a table saw, that's 3.5, you get 1 3/4. With the adjustment of the legs, is that still
that would be a little-
doable, or?
be a little narrow,
Maybe a little-
right? You know, and I thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm a cheap guy. You know, my end track legs, I get a 2x4 and I make my legs out of 2x4s. I found using the 1x3 pine is the most effective way. From a price standpoint, the 1x3 is actually cheaper than a 1x4 because you're paying for the wood. You know, so now I've already got a one dimension I don't have to mess with. I just cut it to length and I go. So that's why I chose to use the 1x3 material.
Well, you may save him money. You would losing time trying to
Right.
rip the board.
Right.
So there were 2 dimensions vertically, 2 3/4 and 3.5.
So we build the modules so they're 2 3/4 tall.
That's the wood part.
That's the wood part. When we set up a layout, we want the base to be nominally 3.5 inches off the table. That gives us some clearance on the bottom to run wires. That gives us,
Okay, so the 3.5 includes
bolts.
the bolt, but the bolt is additionally extendable for another 1/2 inch.
Correct.
To get you to this maximum of 4 inch.
Correct.
So you have your adjustability.
Right. So
Well
construction-wise,
said. Yeah, it is.
construction-wise, I mean, that's got a through hole in it. So I could put a bolt in at least that long, put a T-nut in the end. it's got the T-nuts, and for those that have built N-Trak, this is a common tool. And then it's just a carriage bolt. This is probably a 2-inch carriage bolt. And we put the wing nut on kind of as a lock nut. And that gives us a nice adjustable height. It's got a nice rounded thing, so we're not, leaving dent marks in the tables or ripping up fabric cloths. Another option is, you look at the bottom of this, this is a furniture caster, that's adjustable. That's $350 at Home Depot. It's got a nice polished surface.
There's also what's called the elevator bolts.
Yeah,
I don't know why they call them elevator bolts.
they're used on grain elevators.
Forgive my ignorance, but these are not bolted together.
They are not.
Clamped together.
They're not.
anyway. There's no mechanical fastening from one to
The unit joiner is it.
The track, the unit joiner is spring loaded and it's clips together. So literally you set the modules down, you get them lined up and just,
and that's adequate.
that's it.
Wow.
I mean, we're setting them on tables, right? Now, if people run up and just body slam the table for some stupid reason, we're gonna mess things up. But because we're not building the freestanding thing like we do with N-Trak, you set it down and snap them together and it works.
And to move on with that, the first thing that fails at a connection is actually the ballast. The ballast fails. That's where we see most of our damage, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. The unijoiner is still strong.
Yeah. It's a well-engineered track for what we're doing. Okay? Plywood method. This is another method. I personally haven't done this. I believe Allie has done this. So if I was going to do this, how would I do it? I would first cut a piece of plywood to make my two sides with extra length and width. So I got a piece up here that does my two sides. Right? I would cut another piece for the top that would also have the front and the back. And again, I'm going to leave some extra length and width on this guy. I just need a good corner on each piece. I would adjust my fence to cut the module depth, to cut the module width. So I'm going to adjust my fence to make, when I cut this guy, I'm going to cut it to width, and I'm going to make that, so now those three pieces are all the same width. Adjust my fence to cut my module depth, I'll make that cut, and while I'm at it, I'm going to take two pieces of this material and stack it against the fence, and I'm going to cut this depth. Okay? So now these pieces are two thicknesses of plywood less than this. Why am I using the material? Because this is never a 1/4 inch, right? It's 0.21 inches or some stuff, and I don't want to try to mess with that on the table saw, so I just use the material as the guide. Then finally, I'm going to adjust the fence to cut my 2 3/4. How to be able to read that off my table saw. I'll put a piece of material against the table saw to represent the table top or the module top, and then I'll cut those. Right, so minimal setups, should be relatively accurate. Glue and tape, support blocks, put it together. The reason I'm not a fan of this personally is trying to glue 1/4 inch material to the adjacent piece, to me seems difficult. I think if you use corner blocks like Justin demonstrated here and the one that Allie made, it makes life a little easier. Like I said, to me, I can pound those out fast. I would think I would struggle a little bit with the plywood, just timing, trying to glue the 1/4 inch material together. Leveling feet, we've talked about this. We want to make those so they're adjustable from 2 3/4 to 4 inches. Standard layout height is at 3.5. We put 2x2 blocks in the corner, cut them 2.5 long so they just fit right up in there. T-nuts in the bottom with 2-inch long carriage bolts. Or you can use these furniture glides. Again, the Home Depot number, $3.86. It's got a plastic insert. You pound in a hole. Doesn't quite give you the full 2 inches, but hasn't really been a problem yet. So the block, again, a through hole, the T-nut, that's the furniture glide. Installed, they look like that. We've
Does
seen
anyone
that.
want to see one? It's pretty simple.
You should note that those are 1/4 inch by 20 thread, also known as coarse thread bolts.
Yeah, it's a quarter 20 coarse thread carriage bolt. So who's up on the finishing?
Can I show you one more thing?
Sure.
Just out of curiosity, I think CMR and Masterpiece
They have,
provide something different, and it's a different thread size.
they do. But you buy their module, you get all those pieces with it. But they still have the same flexibility of the height and everything else. It's just a different thing.
When I was putting together my corners using the 3/4 inch plywood, I found these little tools at Rockler up in the north side. Anyway, what they do is they lock your 45 cuts together so you get a perfect right angle. And they clip on, you know, they're stiff and they're meant to be, but they just push on. They leave the edges exposed so you can either drill and screw or shoot a nail into them. So they're really handy for doing perfectly right angle modular from 3/4 dimensional
This is
lumber.
another tool that is useful too, made by Craig. It's a right angle vise that you can adjust and clip out to 3/4 inch to take the plywood as well. And it also allows for like a little bit of adjustment on there too, the open ends to screw or nail either way as well. I found this one at Lowe's. Like Bob said, he got those at Rockler. So there are some options too to ensure a tight right angle corner fit.
These are like $8 for a set of 4.
I think
And
this
they
guy
have,
was like 25.
yeah.
Yeah.
They also have, if you want to use a 5/8 dimensional lumber, that's a possibility. They also have 5/8 version.
So, I'm noticing yours are mitered.
Mine are not.
Yeah, you could also do this with, you know, butt joints as well. These will work for that as well.
It's really, how do you want to build it? As long as it's a square corner, nobody cares. And quite frankly, that's all you should see. You know, so, you know, I've got the same reveal that Bob's got. Again, I chose simple, cut a 90-degree. I'm a fan of pocket holes, so I screwed mine together from the inside, so you don't see the screw heads.
Pocket holes.
I got some other examples I'll show you later.
Yeah, so we're getting into a subject of furniture building.
Yeah.
We don't want to go into furniture building, okay? He's using a method that I use that is really more for installing cabinets. I don't want to go down that road. So you're right. You can do a 45 corner. You can do butt joints, but the real magic is going to happen after this is all built. This takes an hour to do. The next parts are much more difficult.
Correct. So who's doing the finishing piece? You?
Let me see the slides and let's see who's got it.
Paint colors?
All right, so thank you. So so at MVNS, the kind of the core members that kind of started, we decided that we wanted to paint the fascia of our modules black. If you don't paint the fascia of your module black, you will not be kicked out of the club. But what was something we came up with after going to other shows, we want the viewer's eye to be attracted to that last couple inches of the module. Not the skirting, not the fascia board, where you put in your hard work, okay? Go to a show, look at layouts with fancy skirting, and it detracts from what we're there to see. We recommend, and actually this is a common thing in model roading, paint the plywood brown. Go get just a shade of brown that matches the dirt that you want. Just paint it brown, that way it hides the blue or the pink or the plywood.
I get mine from the mixed for like a couple of bucks a quart.
If you're hard up, come to my house. I've got gallons of black and brown paint and blue. Senior should and auxiliary tracks can run to the edge of the module but cannot interfere with joining modules. You cannot have your scenery past the edge of your 308. So you should not interfere with the operations of the train. NMRA clearance gauges. Special care must be used on corners, considering long passenger auto rack rolling stock. Center of car will overhang inside of radius. Corner of car will overhang outside of radius. You guys understand this? When you have a long auto rack and it's going around a corner, you can actually look down and you can see the outside rail. I made this mistake, by the way. You cannot use the edge of the ballast as your gauge. You need to give some extra room on those corners.
We had a really nicely finished inside corner tunnel module one time, showed up to a show. It was the last module to go on the layout, and we had to rip the tunnel apart because it didn't fit.
It did not meet the NMRA standard. Okay, so laying track. So kind of in my earlier stuff, we used basically glue. And this was after experimenting with a lot of different glues that we wound up using Aleene's glue. This is just their fast grab tacky glue. Aleene's is in that brown bottle. You've seen it everywhere. It's a clap glue. The advantage of this over Elmer's is this, when it dries and you go to rip up your track, it's pliable, it's tacky, and you can kind of like roll it off of the track and get it off. Elmer's dries hard as a rock, and you are going to be scraping for days trying to get that glue off. So this was a measure that if you ever need to have to pull up your track, we use glue. We got away from this because, first of all, the glue would migrate. The track would migrate on the surface of the glue, and you'd come back a day later and things had shifted a millimeter or two. Well, in T Trak, a millimeter is a long way. We started going to the method of screwing down the track, and so this is an interesting way to do it, and it works really well. First of all, you got to get the Markland 7599 screws. Don't go to Home Depot and think you're going to find a screw that's going to work, because you're probably not going to. These are Z-scale screws. You have to get them from like Z-scale Hobo, and you go in with your buddies on shipping. Again, I buy like 2 or 3 boxes at a time, and we divvy it up.
The hyperlink there in Markland 7599, which should take you to an Amazon link. When you guys get this presentation, you can click on that and go buy it from Amazon.
eBay? Did I hear? eBay? Okay. So to do this, you have to drill a hole into a piece of track. If you flip the track over, there are these studs with a hole in the middle. I'm sure everyone in the back can see this, right? So you're going to have to take my word for it. There's a hole in the middle. What you do is you take your piece of track and a 16th inch drill bit, and you're going to drill from the bottom up, okay, in the middle of that stud. Then, because we're all good carpenters at heart, we're going to take a 1/8 inch bit or somewhere in that neighborhood, and we're going to drill down and you're just countersinking. You're just countersinking that hole for that screw to sit into. It makes it nice and flush, and then your eye just doesn't even see it after it's laid. Don't over-tighten them. When you over-tighten, you get this in your track. We can practice this later. It's a simple technique. Once you do it, you'll probably never look back. To drive the screw in, the screw's tiny. I've got it in my hand. Can't you guys see it? You're going to use a Phillips 0 bit. This is an old one. I took the head and chopped it off, and I can chuck this up into my drill if I want to. And very slowly, on your lowest chuck setting, you can put this in. The screw is small enough. The plywood is porous enough that you can do it with your hand. You can just, with your hand, zip that screw in. I choose to use my drill just to save my hands because, yeah. And speed is one thing, torque is the big one. If you've got a high torque setting, you don't want it because you'll rip right through your work. And we've done it in N Trak, and I hope we don't do it in T Trak. If you have a high torque setting on any drill, you're going to tear up your work. Keep that torque setting as low as you can. Something I wish I had done a layout ago Seal the edges of switches so that capillary action doesn't suck the glue in and foul the switch. If you take a turnout and flip it over, there's a panel on the back to protect the electrical. It obviously has cracks in it. And when you put glue in and doing your scenery and all that, it seeps in, gets up into your turnout, and after that, it's a lot of work to get it done. So there's a backer plate here. Inevitably, your scenery glue is going to get underneath and foul the turnout. So something I wish I had done is seal the back of this. How do you seal it? So like, it's just regular caulk?
Yeah, so like on the new yard, before we laid the switch, I took latex caulk and I caulked all the way around each switch and then cleaned it up. May not be perfect. When I lay it, and I wish I had done this, on like my quad, I've got half a dozen switches and none of them work because they all got fouled with glue. But if you would get like a clear silicone once you lay it, then you could, you know, put a bead of silicone along the edge, or just be really, really careful when you put your scenery up against the track. But something to seal this edge to prevent the glue from seeping up underneath that switch.
You can measure all you want. You can go buy the nicest measuring tape you can find. It's just easier with jigs. Okay, so what I did is I cut to lay track, I cut an 1.5 inch wide piece of wood, and I lay that at the front of the module. I think we've got some graphics coming. So this piece of wood is my jig now from the front of the module to give me my 1.5 inch spacing for that first set of tracks, okay? The next thing that you need to, actually let me back up and say, you can find these available online. You can print all kinds of jigs to give you the 1.5 inch spacing from the front of the module. There's these notches here where the track would sit in perfectly to give you that 33 millimeter spacing to make sure everything is right. Little meat on the back. You can use these. The problem is that it does not give you your track to be transversely even. Okay, so when I talk about transversely even, I'm talking about the red line and the yellow line being exactly right. So you can use jigs like this, but it will not get you this evenness. We have this on a couple different modules throughout the club where they're not even. So you need to be transversely even. How do we achieve that? We use these Kato 62 millimeter long double track pieces. It does everything. It gets you 33 millimeters apart, and it makes sure you're transversely even. Something that I had was I had a turnout laid wrong. It was a different size turnout. I had the pieces in the wrong section, and the yellow line was longer than the red line. I caught it with this. My good friend Justin Sobek, accidentally a 64 millimeter track came in. Kato also makes a 64 millimeter. You cannot tell it by looking at it that it's 2 millimeters longer than the 62, which is the standard. It slipped into his work. Now, luckily, he had a workaround. Everything's fine. He's good to go. But these 64s slip into your stuff. These will catch it.
The other thing you can do with those too is I use an old credit card for the 1 millimeter gap on each end to gauge the gap.
That is a great idea. I always did it with my fingers. If it felt kind of right, if I had a little overhang, I think a credit card is a great idea to use as a jig on the outside to make sure you're a millimeter over. Okay, any questions on laying track?
Can you have someone kind of vanna-white with you and demonstrate your plywood jig and the track above?
That's a great idea. Justin, would you help me out?
Yeah.
We got a single over here. We've got this here. So this is the front of my module here, right? I bring in the jig. That's my 1.5 inch, okay? Now I know where my tracks need to be. Thanks, Malcolm. And the first track is going to go there. Now, what do we need to do? Be 33 millimeters apart and transversely even. So I will clip in this here and this here, obviously with my yellow line laid in there. And I will ensure that I'm at 33 millimeters and transversely even. And then, like Justin said, you can take a credit card and butt it up against here to make sure you've got a millimeter overhang. And then these obviously come off, right? And man, it's a great feeling when you pull those off and everything is just right and God is in his heaven. It's wonderful because you know that from there on, as long as you follow the NMRA standard, you can have fun with your module.
Ken, I will also say, if you buy double track, if you buy those pieces and you do the whole thing in double track, then you don't have to worry about spacing.
That's what they were asking.
So you can do that too.
Okay.
One other consideration is that Kato only makes the double track and concrete ties, with the exception of the universal double crossover. So if there's a consideration for your module appearance to have wood ties versus concrete ties, that's also a factor too.
Has another question, but I can talk about the double crossover. I have a powered Kato unit track, double crossover. Can that be used in T Trak? Is that where if you're like you flip the switch to like, yeah.
Hey, Bob, would you, since you're going to come up here, why don't you just show these guys? So yes, so while Bob comes up here, yes, you can use it. The tricky part about the Kato double crossover is you have to feed power from all 8 points. Ask me how I know. Because I deadened a section of our layout, I think in DeSoto, because I didn't have it wired right. If you want to do a double crossover, come talk to me and we'll have a serious talk.
Yeah, if you look here at this one, you'll see that I have jumper wires soldered here at both ends, and that allows power to be routed through the entire thing. You'll also notice that I went in a little bit extra. I built myself a switch that allows me to control whether I'm running DC or DCC, and I can turn these, switch it to either way. So
Bob held out on me. He didn't tell me about that little trick. That's pretty cool.
All right, developing a scene. This is something that's, really up to you as an individual, how you like to do things. However, I thought I'd try and go through and give you an idea of, the process that I go through. There's a couple of approaches that you can use. You can make a fantasy scene, or you can model a specific prototype. It just depends on what kind of action you want to depict. You see here's a module that I had that was under development. I picked out some buildings that I thought would be interesting to group together and started trying to figure out, well, how do I want them to be placed on the module? In this case, it's a double. You can see that, to some questions we had earlier about the foam, you can see this is a masterpiece module kit that has the 1-inch recessed base. And so on top of that, I have an inch of pink foam. That way I could carve out my ditches and anything else that I want to depict. So I started, laying out where I thought I might, place things. I kind of indicated here's a road, and here's another road. And I just started moving things around. I wasn't happy with how this was looking, though, because it's kind of boring, to be honest. It doesn't show any kind of action. There isn't any kind of movement within the scene. So we move on to the next phase, and here's a little further along. You notice that one little white building? That was going to be a barbecue shack. Well, I decided it didn't fit. It did not fit my scene. There was too much. It was going to be too crowded. So I took it out. I also, instead of having this road come in straight, notice it's off at an angle. When you have angles, they tend to draw the eye into the scene or into the picture. That's why when you see fine art out there, you'll see that there's oftentimes angles that pull the viewer into the scene. They try and set up like triangles, and not just perspective lines. They set up movement within the scene to pull you into it. So I set up my road to cross back at an angle.
And then I have my other little parallel because, oftentimes in railroading scenes, you have a frontage road. Just like right down here in Eureka, there's, Frisco Avenue. And it's, runs parallel to the tracks. So I also, decided I want, this building here, being set at an angle, it just, again, gives you, some interest. It draws in to it. Next thing is when you're working with a prototypical scene, a friend of mine was out vacationing in Montana. He's touring big sky country. Well, he happened to come across this building, and he took a picture of it and sent it to me. Because he knew I liked, different forms of architecture. This was a really neat looking Art Deco building. I thought, well, that's kind of neat. I wonder what I could do with that. So I started researching the building. I found out that it was on the historic register of historic buildings. So that building is actually preserved as a, what's the term? Anyway. So, they can't modify the building, they can't tear it down, it's there, forever. And it's just really interesting looking to me. I really liked this little turret structure, so I started researching it further. I went to Google Maps. I brought up the building. It's in Livingston, Montana. And so I started looking, I started zooming out. First thing Google Maps does, it brings you to, to this picture of the building. So I started, went to the sky view and started zooming out. And I said, wait, what's this? What do we see here? Turns out this was the Montana Rail Link and now BNSF main line. I said, perfect. This will make a module. So I didn't, there's another screen that I would have liked to go through, and that's the actual historic register website. And it had technical drawings of the building. Because in order to get it on the register, they had to submit blueprints and all kinds of other information. Well, that's exactly what I needed to do to model this in a CAD program. So I went in and drew it up using the dimensions on the website to make the actual building itself. And so I 3D printed the building. It's printed with the combination of FDM, which is the filament style printing, and also resin. The turret and the window frames and everything else were all printed on a resin printer. So then I developed the scene out. Now the other thing is, I wanted to do it on a single because I kind of wanted this to be taken around to shows for judging. So I didn't want to get a big module built. So when you have a prototypical scene, a lot of times you have to go in and do what's called selective compression. You cluster things closer together because you don't have enough space necessarily to put all that in. So you start having to make decisions about where or how much space is going to be between the different elements and what all elements do you want to include. Well, I had enough room for the main building obviously, but the actual setback of the building is much further from the road. Also, if you notice from the sky view, the road is not quite that close to the track. Another element was where this occurs, there was a single crossover, but I made the decision I wanted to have a double crossover. So when I'm running trains at home, if I want to run a single train, I can run around one train around the whole thing and then use the double crossover to run from inside to outside track. So I made all those kind of decisions and to develop my scene here and fit the narrative. Now, another thing that you have to consider, and I'm going to come over here and grab something out of my box. Sorry. You see that radio mast back here? This is Showcase Miniatures antenna. One thing you have to consider when you're building your modules is that they're transported. You move them around. I don't know if you can see this, but this was the first antenna. It kind of got smashed after a train show during teardown. So Nobody's fault, it was my fault, I'm not gonna, anyway, so I had to come up with a way to eliminate that problem. So when you just, I'm sorry, let me, thank you. So how do you handle, your this kind of issue where you have to have transportability in your modules? Well, in this case, I decided, since this is also lighted, there's a little LED at the top of this. This antenna now comes out, and I have made contacts in the bottom of it to supply power to the LED. Something else you can't really see here, I put a clear lucite rod up the center to give more strength to the, the actual antenna itself. So I had to make all these kind of decisions, for transport. And then I created this little PVC pipe storage so I could move this thing around and not worry about damaging it. So you got to take into consideration that you're going to be moving your modules around, and take care that you take that into account. All right, thank you, Ollie, appreciate it. Next thing, oops, I'm going the wrong way here. Talk about some pointers. Try not to overcrowd your modules. You can cram so much stuff into a scene that it just starts getting cluttered, and you lose some of that the interest that might be in your scene because there's just too much to look at. Nature does not like straight lines. Nature will never have a straight line. We, man, are the only things that create straight lines. Okay, so, you have a creek, it's not going to run perfectly straight. It's going to meander. Be sure and take that into account. Make sure the terrain you're modeling matches what you're trying to do. Because, these are flat top modules. It's easy to just spray down some glue and put on grass. But most of the land around here, even the flattest land, has some slight undulations to it. So you may take that into account. Vegetation is rarely the same color throughout. The only exceptions, golf courses, national parks, down at the arch grounds. That's all, the same type of grass, so it's always it's always the same color. If you'll notice on this module over here, I've taken and mixed together several different colors of grass and modeled, some areas. Some places I've got brownish dry grass, where the grass has died. So always, consider that your trees are never going to be the same colors and grass is never going to be the same color. Most railroad right-of-ways and roadways have drainage ditches. So be sure to add those. Don't forget infrastructure. You've got telephone poles, you've got signage. Railroads have signals, they have mile markers, whistle stops, things like that. Add those in. That helps build the scene. Telephone poles, Woodland Scenics just came out with those nice new elastic stringed telephone poles. Those are great. And I've got some on order. I'm going to be adding them to several of my modules. Include in vignettes, little things that Easter eggs, some people call them, like the double module that you saw with the gas station, the Waffle House. That has a little junked out car in one corner of the finished module. There's a group of bikers at the Waffle House. Different things that create a narrative on your module. It makes it interesting for somebody to look at. Somebody I saw had a module that had Bigfoot. Glenn's got his Batmobile in the Ajax Chemical. Different little things that create some interest, and especially for kids, they like finding that kind of stuff. If there's a prototype out there, if you want to do something, there's probably a prototype for it. I just made a post to the Facebook page. I discovered that there's a railroad in Canada that a American seafood company is using to circumvent some of the rules for ship ownership. An American seafood company or anything operating out of U.S. waters has to be a U.S. flagged, U.S. owned ship. Well, they were using a Panamanian, I think it was, ship and not American crew for their ship. Well, there's a loophole in this act that the U.S. has that covers that says if you ship it via rail in Canada, you can then bring it into the U.S. without meeting those regulations. So guess what? They put a 200-foot long railroad line across the border in Canada. They trucked this seafood in to that railroad, put the truck on the flat car, had this little switcher, pulled it down that 200-foot length of track, offloaded the truck, and were able to come into the U.S. Okay, so it's incredible, you know, but there's going to be a prototype for anything out there. And finally, and what bugs me sometimes when I go to some of these shows, keep things G-rated, or at least PG. I've seen several modules at shows where somebody had a sex on the beach kind of scene. Please, it's your module, but if you're going to show it at a family show, please don't do that.
And to add into that, Bob, there was a news piece some years ago about a layout that had something that was socially unacceptable. That made the news. That whole train show, all that art, all those kids being happy, what did the news focus on? That one socially unacceptable 1 foot by 1 foot scene. Your imagination's only limit. If you can dream it, you can build it. Okay, so because we have so many new members, and we have some members that have forgotten, we need to talk about kind of some of the social rules at train shows for us. It says T Trak etiquette, it goes to the N track as well, okay? Keep the area on the table top free of boxes, bags, and cups. This is tough. This is tough to abide by because you get a soda, you go to fix a train, and you set your soda down, and you don't even think about it. This is a tough rule. Especially with T Trak, there's all that table space. In T Trak, what we can now do in MVNS is have this little foot and a half area. Actually, it's a little bigger when we get away from the yard. We can have that area as a buffer zone for little hands and big hands. So we keep that buffer there. That's why when you come to a show and you're like, well, wait a minute, why don't we just run our modules right up to the edge? We're using that as a buffer. Sawdust, scenery, all that stuff gets on that table surface. And like we talked about, you want the viewer, their eye to be brought up from the floor to that last couple inches of where all your hard work was. So we try to keep things clear. We try to keep this trough clear. There's some wires hanging out here. That's just going to happen. MVNS is big on presentation. You know that just by this presentation. We like our stuff to be clean and neat, and so we run the wires underneath the modules. Sawdust. Keep back from the layout so other visitors can see the trains. Once you get your trains set up, take a step back and run your trains. And you can do it from a chair. I watched Bob do it at Springfield. He could monitor his trains from a chair, and you let the spectators in close. Keep surrounding setup tables clean and uncluttered. This is another big problem for us. We have these tables we set all our stuff on. It looks terrible. So keep your stuff clean, keep it organized. And what I do is I take all that ugliness and I jam it under the table. And it's a complete mess under the table, but it's hidden. And like I said, store train cases under the layout. Also, you want to leave those other tables, those setup tables. In T Trak, we always have 2 setup tables. You want to keep those open for people to be able to open up their trains and get their trains out and set them up. Or if someone wants to have a snack or just hang out and talk, you want that table space open. Try to keep your stuff underneath the layout. So I'm just going to read through this, and I love death by PowerPoint. I bullet point everything because I can then transmit this to you, and you have these bullet points for yourself to kind of as a reminder. So I'm just going to read them off. Have your trains cleaned, maintained, and ready to go before the show. Address your locomotives before the show. We don't do 0-0 running on T Trak. We physically cannot do it the way the electronics are. We can do it in N Track. We really try not to. 0-0 running, to clear it up, is being able to run a DC locomotive on DCC. We try not to do it because it causes problems. 03 is the default address that most locomotives come with when they come from the factory with a decoder. Do your best, try to get away from it. I see it as an address. It's an address you're using. But if you have the facilities before the show, or if you want to come to my house and hang out and we'll address locomotives and just talk, that's fine too. Place your train on the layout, preferably at the yard. I say preferably because we have inner loops that don't have a yard connection, and you can set up there. Also, the yard gets busy, and before a show, if you want to set up a train and the yard is completely busy, you can get on the main line and set up. But preferably, you're going to be in the yard. Once railed, clear away your boxes and make room for the next person. Yard your train or give it to another member if you have to use the restroom or run off to a vendor table for a hot deal on a big boy, Kato big boy locomotive. Everyone gets it. Sometimes you got to run up to the bathroom. Sometimes you get hungry. Sometimes something happens. Just either yard it or give it off to another member for them to run. Yard your train for short periods of time. So let's say you're going to run out and have an hour-long lunch. You can yard it, okay? Or if you're going to be gone for 30 or 40 minutes, you can yard it. That's acceptable. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Short periods of time, you yard it. Take it off if you're going to lunch. Did someone just say 30 minutes? Let's 30 minutes. That's just a good kind of mental, right? 30 minutes, you're going to be gone 30 minutes, put it in the yard. More than that, you need to consider taking it off. Run one train at a time. You're not as good as you think you are. This is me and Casey at Springfield. There's even a fire there. You're not as good as you think you are. Just run one train at a time. You're going to enjoy it more. You're going to enjoy it more. That's part of, I think that's one of the parts of model railroading is enjoying it. Keep an eye on the train in front of you, on your train and the train in front of you. Goes without saying, right? But we can't not say it. If a car or locomotive has consistent problems derailing, take it off the track. Some kind of field ways to kind of fix a problem is flip the car around. Sometimes by the magic of model railroading, flipping around the car helps it. Big problem is trip pins, especially when we come to Kato crossovers, turnouts, and 90 degrees. Is any trip pin that is not at NMRA, it's going to catch, and it's gonna stop your train dead. That tiny little trip pin will stop your train dead, and you won't be able to figure out why, because it's a trip pin. So just keep an eye on that. Ask me how I know. Ask me how I know. If you're setting up someone else's modules, involve them in anything you do. Include the owner in any adjustments you need to make. So this is more for us that kind of put the finishing touches on things. But if you're going to put your hands on someone else's module, involve them. I don't even want to know how much money is on that single module over there that Bob showed us. But think about it and think how you'd want your stuff treated. Most loss and damage to modules comes at teardown. There's no debate. Broken track bed, missing unit joiners, lost or misplaced parts, and wiring. So here we can see here the Unitrack ballast failed before the unit joiner did. This is not my module, it was a module I bought, but there's really no fix in this other than relaying the track. It comes at teardown. That's where we see it. Missing wiring is, to make things work, we have to have a lot of wire underneath. Some of it is club owned, some of it is personal owned. If you don't know, just leave it on the table. But don't put it in a, if you see a wire, don't put it in a box of wires unless you know it goes there. Does that make sense? Because it could be Bob's wires that he needs for his arch module, and they don't belong to the club. So for module separation, you're going to use a thin screwdriver to insert between the two main lines and then pry.
I have one of those chip pullers. I didn't bring it with me today, but
So the chip puller is great, and that is pretty much what we're talking about. Yeah, so this is a chip puller used in computer work. It's perfect for model railroading. When you leave here, immediately go buy one of these. It is just amazing, and I'll send out the information on it. It's got a fork in it so that if you ever needed to pull nails or something like that, it's got a curve. You can pry. It is narrow, so you can get it between two modules and pry, which we'll talk about. And for putting on N-Trak rail joiners, God, the bane of N-Trak, it is perfect. This fork fits over the rail and you slide it back and forth. The other close second is a screwdriver with a notch cut out. These were made, what was that, 2008? We went to Derby City. And these are sometimes around. You can 3D print a screwdriver. You do not want to use anything that's larger than 2 millimeters. You do not want to use paint can openers or church keys or whatever you call them. What happens? You get damage. I don't know if I admit. Dang it, not again. Kevin. I did it. It was bound to happen in this presentation. Can you please help me? Yeah, Mike.
It's a chip lifter, not a puller.
He's totally right. It even says it on here. It's a chip lifter.
And Micro Center used to have some, I haven't been there lately and looked, but they used to carry them there. I think though that they may have been part of a larger kit.
I got one at Gateway Electronics.
Right. Can you send me the Google directions to Gateway Electronics? I'm sorry, Kevin. While he undoes what I did, Gateway Electronics is no longer around. It's very, very sad. You can buy these online. You can buy them at Micro Center in Brentwood. And you see them sometimes in weird places, like at hardware stores. You'll just see them and you're like, oh, I better buy one.
Is this a slide you want?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
What was the place in Brentwood that has them?
Micro Center.
At least they used to have them. I haven't checked.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, right? During our kind of hands-on period, we're going to talk about how to separate modules. I can't do it right here, but if you want to save your work and not break it, you'll use this technique. If you don't know what it does or where it goes, ask someone who does. If you still can't figure it out, leave it on a table or other MVNS property. We'll find it. We'll find it. Springfield, the last little bit of Springfield, I was finding stuff because someone had set it out for me and I found it. This says MVNS property. It could be anything. If you find a tree, a locomotive, a car, leave it out. Now, if you're the last one there and there's a car sitting on the table, grab it. We'll figure out who it goes to. Any questions? Some resources.
Yes, just real quick on these resources, guys. The standards document, again, that's the website that actually will take you to the long version of what we talk about. Okay, lots of nitty gritty. We try to break it down so it was simple and manageable. And in this general information, the T Trak handbook, the T Trak wiki dot, these are great resources, not just for T Trak, One of my favorite scenery tools is how to build a road. And I found it on the T Trak wiki doc. And you can do it anywhere, but I found that written there. So I really would encourage you guys to go check these things out. If you're not a member of the T Trak Facebook group, that's another great resource of, you know, lots of people with lots of experience. Okay? I think that is it. Oh, I went forward. That's the end of our formal presentation, so.
Hey, can you